This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today is Friday. It's July 28th, 2023. A story broke yesterday. It was by a good friend of mine. Dr. Mercola basically broke the news yesterday that Henry Kissinger has had a plan for a long time. This goes back to the 1970s. Henry Kissinger, who was under Nixon, he was the advisor to Nixon. He's ultimately Secretary of State in the 1970s. I knew Kissinger. I've met him several times in New York. I have been able to spend a little bit of time with him. I'm sure he doesn't really focus on who I am particularly, but I was a graduate student when he was at Harvard. He was just leaving to go to the Nixon administration in my first year at Harvard, which is 1968, and it was a 69, and it was a raucous time. But this Dr. Robert Malone came on. He was on yesterday with Steve Bannon on the War Room, and he said that since the 1970s, it's been the official policy of the United States to depopulate the world. Now, even I've known Dr. Robert Malone quite well and greatly respect him. And I paid attention to this story because I thought, okay, let's look into it. And it turns out he's exactly right, that Kissinger, when he was at Harvard, Klaus Schwab was really one of his students. Kissinger fled from, his parents fled from Nazi Germany in 1938. Got to the United States. He was 15 years old. He fought in World War II, and he was in the intelligence units in World War II. And he came out, went to Harvard after the war, got a PhD, and was always in this leftist intelligence group, the globalists, who were at that time trying to figure out how the world would shape up after the defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. So Kissinger came out. He became very connected to the Council on Foreign Relations, the Rockefeller family, and they are globalists. They one world. This is the New World Order crowd. And Klaus Schwab, Kissinger was also intermittently working with the CIA, and the CIA basically concocted the plan to create the World Economic Forum. It came out of their thinking, and now I think it's fairly well documented. I've been reading this morning various background papers on Kissinger, and I've known him, read his works, I think I have most of his books, and Kissinger is clearly a New World Order thinker. Okay, now the report that he did is a National Security Memorandum. It's this report right here. Okay, I printed it out this morning. And Chris, we probably, there we go, get a little bit better view of it. I don't know if you can read it. It's a little bit small, but it's National Security Memorandum. It was done on December 10th, 1974, and it's called Implications of Worldwide Population Growth for U.S. Security and Overseas Interests. Okay, so it starts out by saying that the executive summary, that world population growth since World War II is quantitatively and qualitatively different from any previous era in human history. Well, in a sense, that's true because it was expanding the population. But what they're saying is that the effect is to double the world's population in 35 years instead of 100 years. Almost 80 million are being added each year compared to 10 million in 1900. Okay, that scares them. There's too many people. Second feature is the sharp differentiation between the rich and poor nations. Since 1950, the population of the former group has been growing much more slowly. Well, that's population dynamics. There's a reduction in birth rates only when the population longevity increases and the population gets to be better off economically. But what they say, that UN estimates 3.6 billion by 1970. We're now at 8 billion. This must just frighten them to death. And they think that the fact is that the world is going to be utilized too many of the Earth's resources. This Malthusian, Malthus was a writer who, I believe in the 1700s, predicted that there was going to be famine in Ireland because there were too many people being born and not enough food could be produced. It's an argument that has deep impact in human psyche, but is not true. So they say growing populations will have a serious impact on the need for food, especially in the fastest growing LDCs, which are less developed countries. So what they basically want to do is they want to impose all kinds of restrictions on population growing, and including birth control. This is, again, the abortion argument. All this comes out of the need to reduce population because they're saying, moderation of population growth rates in the less developed countries could make some difference to food requirements by 1985, a substantial difference by 2000, and a vast difference in the next century. So what they wanted to do is reduce the number of births in the less developed countries so we could exploit their resources. We could have the resources of the world to ourselves, and then restrict the growth of the population in the United States, and to do it by any means necessary, which would be including reducing fertility, having abortions, changing the idea of sex from marriage. I mean, all these things are good ideas to these people. Now, I write about this extensively in my book on the truth about energy, global warming, and climate change. I start out here. This was apparent to me. I did not know about this Kissinger report, but I knew what was going on in the 50s and 60s, and that was that we had a movement, an intellectual movement that was saying we need to limit population. And it started with this whole Save the Earth movement that books like this, Population Bomb, Paul Ehrlich, 1968. Started a little bit before that. But the idea is that there are simply too many people, and we will use all the resources of the earth. So Ehrlich, let me read a couple paragraphs here. Ehrlich, by the way, studied butterflies, and he never said there were too many butterflies. So there were too many people. So his primary conclusion, there are too many people in the world. The battle to feed all of humanity is over, Ehrlich described the population bomb. In the 1970s, the world will, this is a quote, in the 1970s, the world will undergo famines. Hundreds of millions of people are going to starve to death in spite of any crash programs embarked upon for now. Nothing could save the world. That's what Ehrlich thought, except for the conscious regulation of the numbers of human beings to meet the needs, not just of individual families, but of the society as a whole. Collectivist. Society is going to determine that we need to have fewer people. So he was on Johnny Carson's show in the 1980s, and he would, Ehrlich left no doubt about his Malthusian positions on oil and population. Do we really want to threaten to blow up the world over a resource we know is going to be gone in 20 or 30 years? That's oil. They thought that we were running out of oil. Fossil fuel, only so many fossils, only so much oil. We're going to run out. Hasn't happened. And so regarding people, he said, if the U.S. population started to decline slowly, if we got our death rate a little bit above our birth rate and held it there for a couple of years, the fact that we are moving back to 150 or 100 million people would not scare me a bit. Well, we're today at 350 million people, and we still have the potential to thrive. So Ehrlich then met Holdren. I want to go back even to one before him. It was Harrison Brown. Harrison Brown started this in the 1950s. Here's his big book, Must Destruction Be Our Destiny? Okay, Harrison Brown was a scientist, and he during World War II, he worked on the Manhattan Project, and he made some significant contributions to it. Einstein and other scientists thought he was a brilliant physicist. But what he concluded was that the world is again running out of fossil fuels. He embraced the idea, the organic. He said oil, like coal, has formed slowly over periods of time from living matter that got trapped in sediments, dinosaurs, dead organisms. Completely wrong. And so he said, if we start using the fossil fuels with this many people, we're going to run out of resources. And what he recommended were the following. He said, restriction of sexual intercourse. Somehow or other that was going to be able to be done. Abortion, sterilization, fertility control, including use of chemical devices to prevent contraception. Remember, these people were writing before there were contraceptives. There were no contraceptives developed until much later than this. This is 1950s. It would be more like the 1970s, 1980s when contraceptives were coming into play. Now, John Holdren joined Paul Ehrlich and his wife Anne Ehrlich. Again, this Harrison Brown was a nuclear scientist. John Holdren was a plasma nuclear scientist. He studied the fundamental processes of how the sun works. And it's very complicated physics. These are two very bright guys. But they both came to the kind of same conclusion that there were too many people. So Holdren teamed up with the Ehrlichs, Paul and Anne Ehrlich, and they produced this book, which is a monster book. It's called Ecoscience. Okay, it's hard to get. I mean, I think I got one a few years ago. It cost about $500 to find a copy of it. There's not very many copies of it. They mostly try to get rid of it because it's out and out. This is where, by the way, this Ecoscience is where the global warming started, because they were first thinking that this would be climate change. It's a 1970 textbook. They weren't certain whether it was going to be global cooling or global warming. But what Holdren's contribution was, he broadened this whole environmental perspective to include climate. In other words, he said, if we're going to get people to really depopulate, we're going to have to convince them that hydrocarbon fuels produce carbon dioxide, and somehow or other that's going to affect the Earth's temperature. They came up with this greenhouse gas idea. They decided that they would exploit that idea to say that we're going to have either global cooling or global warming. They didn't care which, just so it would be an existential threat if we didn't do something about hydrocarbon fuels, which meant we would stop using hydrocarbon fuels, and then we could not maintain the modern industrial states. Populations would have to be killed because we couldn't feed them. Wouldn't have nitrous oxide is another greenhouse gas. You say, well, we got to get rid of nitrous oxide, then you can't have fertilizer, you can't produce the food. I'm going to read a paragraph, and then I'm going to ask Chris to comment. This is one quotation from the first sections of their 1970 edition of the Ecoscience. The explosive growth of the human population is the most significant terrestrial event of the past millennia. 3.5 billion people now inhabit the Earth, and this number increases by 70 million each year. Armed with weapons as diverse as thermonuclear bombs and DDT, which at that time they were worried about, not a fertilizer, but it killed weeds and things of that nature. This massive humanity now threatens to destroy most of life on the planet. Mankind itself may stand on the brink of extinction. In its death throes, it could take with it most of the other passengers of spaceship Earth. No geological event in a billion years, not the emergence of mighty mountain ranges, nor the submergence of entire subcontinents, not the occurrence of periodic glacial ages, has posed a threat to terrestrial life compatible comparable to that of human overpopulation. Okay, so it's basically a suicidal kind of concept. I mean, there's too many of us, we got to kill some, but don't kill me. You know, I'll be one of the elite. I'm just going to tell you how to kill the others. So if man, by 1968, they believed it was going to be too cold. If man survives the comparatively short-term threat, this is of making the planet too cold, there's every indication he's capable of making it too warm not there long after. Okay, now they had an Ehrlich's. They wanted there to be actual numbers of children you could have. Children would be taken away from you. He didn't go so far as to say they would kill children, but they were going to do everything they could to prevent children from being born. And this starts the whole movement. This movement is going on at the same time we're getting neo-Marxism coming on the scene. And what they finally decide was that it's okay for them to lie in order to achieve their goal of reducing population. Because if we don't reduce population, they think that we're all going to die. Now, I'm going to give you a counter to that in a minute. But Chris, do you want to comment?
Think about it this way. Ask yourself why the far left, or the global elites, if you will, both the same way, are advocating the instigation of new wars. Why are they working to hurt or cut the world food supply? Why are they dumbing down first world education? Why are they encouraging abortion in poorer communities? This is all part of what you're talking about. It's just a modern day look at it. One cannot do this by force like the Chinese did for a little while to, let's just say, address their overpopulation issues. People will not listen to force. However, if you dumb down education enough, give it a couple generations and people will fall in line. That's what's happening now.
Well, I want to counter this with Julian Simon, because Julian Simon is really one of my heroes. He was an economist, and he held a position as a senior fellow at the Cato Institute in Washington. He was conservative. That was his last job. He had been a university professor at the University of Illinois Urbana in Champaign, and then at the University of Maryland. He was born in 1932 in Newark, and he was educated at Harvard. He got his PhD at the University of Chicago. He wrote a number of books, which I have, again, a whole collection of them. He was a resource economist, and he was not a Malthusian. What Simon realized was that the greatest natural resource, the ultimate resource, is human beings. And the ultimate resource is our ability to have ingenuity, creativity, productivity. We create rather than destroy. That's a fundamental difference in the whole outlook. Chris, if you could find a book called The Ultimate Resource, it's by Julian Simon, Simon, and post a copy of it. I'd like people to see that. I'm going to read you something he wrote. Every resource economist knows that all natural resources have been getting more available rather than more scarce, as shown by their prices dropping over the centuries. And every demographer knows that the death rate has been falling all over the world. Life expectancy almost tripled in the rich countries in the past 2 centuries and almost doubled in the poor countries in just the past 4 decades. This is the most important and amazing demographic fact. The greatest human achievement in human history took thousands of years to increase life expectancy at birth from just over 20 years to the high 20s at about 1750. Suddenly, about 1750, life expectancy in the rich countries began to rise, so the length of a life could be expected for a baby or an adult in the advanced countries had jumped from less than 30 years to maybe 75 years. That's the ultimate resource. And if you see, he says natural resources and energy are getting less scarce. That's not true. He said are getting less scarce. I'm sorry, it is true. They're getting less scarce. We have more. His basic proposition is that there's more of everything than you think there is. There's more oil than anybody imagines there. More coal. We have more coal today. They were worried in the 1850s we'd run out of coal in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. we still today have more coal than we know what to do with. Pollution has been decreasing. When I was a kid, the smog in the cities from the pollution of cars was horrendous. The world food supply is improving. Population growth has long-term benefits. The number of people on the earth is not crowding the earth. You think about big cities like New York, it's densely populated. It still works. But if you travel anywhere in the country or in any country, you'll be astounded at how much open space there is. The density of New York City is not the density of the United States in population. So Julian Simon said, after World War II, the length of life could be expected in the poor countries. It leaped upward by 15 or 20 years because of advances in agriculture, sanitation, and medicine. It is a decrease in the death rate that has caused there to be a larger world population nowadays than in former times. He's right. It isn't just these people are populating, having babies like bunny rabbits. It's the fact that the people are living longer. And so you've got multi-generations being able to live on Earth at the same time. If you could previously have people who were dead at 20. That's why if you go back and read and study previous centuries, people were getting married very, very early because they didn't have long to live. Now, what Julian Simon did is he was the first to say that this peak oil theory is nonsense. Much more oil than we think there is. He was right. He was constantly fighting for this. He had he had kind of a change in heart one day when he was, when the Iwo Jima monument was being dedicated in Washington. He was there. And what Julian Simon realized, there was someone who gave a speech at that time, one of the rabbis, who was talking about the precious nature of life. And what Simon realized was that having gone, the Holocaust and all of the death from World War II, that in fact, how many Einsteins had been killed among the Jews that were killed, burned or their children to be. And he said, the ultimate resource is human beings. We've got to constantly keep that in mind. Now, I want to cover one or two more articles very quickly because they fit together now that we've established this groundwork. The one on the climate, hottest summer ever. You're hearing everywhere, hottest summer ever. Never been this hot. Historic records. This wouldn't be happening without climate change. It's all nonsense. It's more lies. Okay, so meteorologist Ryan Maue, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, said without climate change, he's saying without climate change, July's summer heat in the Southwest would have been virtually impossible. That's the headlines. Those are the headlines. And he said, I guess that would be true if your memory hole, forget about 1925, the 1930s. We had the Dust Bowl in the West. The whole western part of the United States blew away. It was incredibly hot and incredibly dry. 1925, 1930s, 1950s, 1980 was so exceptionally hot many decades ago. You can't say without laughing that the recent July temperatures in Texas was unprecedented. We had hot weather in 1990, 1995, 2012, 2020, 2020. So you got to throw away the almanac to believe this nonsense. As the climate research did not examine the effect either of El Nino, which is these weather currents in the Pacific that make it warmer here in the United States. Plus, the fact is that the sun right now in sun cycle 25 is burning hotter than in sun cycle 24. It's still not burning as hot as it burned 300 years ago in terms of sunspots. But it's lies. It's summer, people. It's hot. Well, that's okay. It's going to change. It'll be fall here pretty soon. Then when it's fall, the leaves fall off the trees. And then guess what? It gets colder because it's winter. Now, these aren't hard concepts. And when it's summer, the earth is northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. We get more intense sun, and we ought to appreciate it. Cold, it's hard even to go outside. We have much more activity for human beings when it's warmer than when it's cold. Now, yes, extreme heats are difficult, but again, extreme colds are worse. You want to live through an ice age? I mean, I don't think we'll be around to try one, but one will be here sooner or later. And then the last story I want to cover, then Chris, I want you to comment again, is another lies being told, and really what this is all about. This is about the World Economic Forum. It's an article in the Gateway Institute, or Gatestone Institute, I believe it is, where the founder of the World Economic Forum, Schwab, routinely opposed China's surveillance state for its capacity to nudge citizens towards compliance, while China apologists turn a blind eye to the one-party communist state committing genocide against Christians, Tibetans, Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, and other minorities. They champion the machinery of China's technocratic totalitarianism as a model for the rest of the world. That's what Klaus Schwab, that's what Kissinger wants. That's what this depopulation movement is all about, is control. Now, what we've done is we've imported Chinese cultural revolution, which is destructive. Destroyed China's culture and put the Chinese people into slavery. That's what communism was intended to do. This article says if President George W. Bush had known in 2001, when this whole movement was to get China into the World Economic Organizations, get World Health Organizations, all of these things, put them part of the global community. Nixon opening up China, going to China with Kissinger. If Bush had known that America blue collars workforce would be languishing today, that China would be killing tens of thousands of Americans each year with fentanyl while stealing American companies' proprietary technology, and that the global institutions such as the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, would be actively promoting Chinese Communist Party's technocratic surveillance state, perhaps he would not have been so eager to empower China through unfettered trade. Perhaps he would acknowledge that China might well succeed in exporting its authoritarian philosophy around the world even more effectively than the United States exports freedom. China's Cultural Revolution already destroyed one great civilization. Perhaps the West should be importing a cultural revolution of its own for freedom before it's too late. Now, all these things fit together. We have a pandemic, and we're finding out that 1 in 35 people have heart problems with the vaccines. We're finding out that the government, Fauci, and the pharmaceutical companies knew that these vaccines were dangerous. They released them anyway under a mandate of experimental mode release because of a crisis, when they did everything they could to ban hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, which were much less well-tested pharmaceuticals that were known not to harm very many people and did prove to be effective against COVID. Had to quash all that, had to lie. Lying is central to what these people do. Then, okay, so now the borders are open, we flood the country. I happen to think that the Spanish population coming into the United States might be the salvation of this country, because I wish it had been done legally. We don't need the drug dealers. We don't need all of this. But again, these people believe in God, and these people want to build families. They want to work. The American people have been so indoctrinated with this neo-Marxism that they're all pseudo-intellectuals and don't realize how much they've been brainwashed. Our universities are a disgrace. San Francisco. I encourage people to read this book too. It's by Michael Schellenberger. It's a very good book. San Francisco. Now, Schellenberger, one of the reasons it's so good is that Schellenberger himself was a progressive. And through his early career, he was all for all these leftist movements, defund the police, have legalized drugs, because, of course, people are going to use them, so don't criminalize them. What he's realized is that these were lies. You've been told a lot of lies. What he's been realizing, if you follow these precepts of George Soros and the left, you end up with a disaster. Every one of our major cities today is in risk of collapse. The federal government is at risk of collapse. And the policies we're putting into place are intended to destroy. It's almost like you set out a map as saying, okay, and when you begin to realize Kissinger in the 70s was planning to depopulate, you begin to get what I am saying in these 3 volumes that I'm writing here. This first one is that you've got to understand that this is not by accident, that there was a conscious attempt to get people to kill themselves. We may be a race that extinguishes ourselves because we allow these ideas to become popular delusions. We are not undergoing global warming of a catastrophic nature because we're burning hydrocarbon fuels. But if we stop using hydrocarbon fuels, we're going to kill billions of people. We're going to put in place a technology that doesn't work. This transition will leave a lot of solar and a lot of wind, a lot of batteries, a lot of using up of natural minerals to produce the batteries. And we'll have neglected the hydrocarbon structure of energy. And at some point that will compound the disintegration of our cities. If you don't have electricity in New York City, what good are the high-rise buildings? These are fundamental ideas that people just don't seem to get their minds around when you've got very smart people preaching destruction. We've got to, if we don't destroy it, we'll have a nuclear war. They'll have a nuclear war because these people are in charge. These people are demons. Their ideas seem to think war is a good idea. It'll depopulate. Arms makers will make money. We can get the multinational corporations more power, and the politicians that protect them will get rich. It's what we're experiencing today. And it's because of this perversion of thinking. I'm doing everything I can to try to point this out to people so we wake up and reject these bad ideas. Chris?
It's like what John Kerry said. I'll fly the private jet because we're special. We're handling this for you. We're doing this for your own good. Klaus Schwab, you'll own nothing and you'll like it. The idea that American leaders, well, I'm going to put leaders in quotes there, are trying to put us all on the electric grid because they want to find a way to control us. They want to control our electric cars. They could probably hack into the computers that are in modern cars anyway. But the idea is people will still hang on to the old gas cars. So you need everyone to modernize so they can be controlled from a remote area. If you think wrong, if you commit wrong think, you won't be able to start your car for a day. If you commit wrong think, you're not going to be able to run your thermostat. Oh my gosh, you're running at 67 degrees? Nope. You need to keep it at 66 degrees. That's it. Oh, wait, one more thing. I remember your showers are too darn long. We're cutting it down to 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, this is the problem. And again, we're doing everything we can to prevent this. And I'm going to wrap up. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. But sincerely join me in 2 Chronicles 7:14. Let's get down on our knees and repent and ask God's forgiveness that we allowed it to get to this point. We allowed these depopulationists, these people who want to take God out of schools, God out of our churches even. We should never allow any of this to happen. Abortion, these are sins against God. In the end, God will win, and I hope it does not take a nuclear war. If these people are in charge, we'll be headed towards totalitarianism, central bank digital currency, 24/7 surveillance of everything we do. I hesitate to think what the world could be if these people remain in charge. In the end, God will win, and that's a thought that encourages me to continue going forward and fighting this, and I plan to do so. Thank you for joining us at the Truth Central. Take a look at our sponsors. It helps us. Swiss America. You can get the book on gold and the coming economic crash. Call that 800 number. At Swiss America, they'll be happy to consult with you and show you how to get some of your IRAs and 401ks into gold. My Vital C keeps me going. I think it's a kind of a wonder miracle molecule. This is thetruthcentral.com. Today is Friday, July 28th, 2023. We will be back on Monday. Have a great weekend. Thank you. God bless.